This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
Hey, Aaron, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. We're still thinking about union. After the work we've done on Federalist Papers 1 through 14, we decided that it would make sense to turn to Lincoln's first inaugural address to try and assess Lincoln's understanding of the union there. Now, the Civil War is extremely complicated. Statesmanship is extremely complicated. Lincoln is a very complicated man. So we're going to try and limit our view here to what Lincoln can teach us about union, seeing where it is that he agrees with or departs from Publius, or helps us understand more clearly some of the arguments adduced in Federalist Papers 1 through 14. But before getting to all of that, Aaron and I decided that it probably would be best to say a few words about the history.
So Lincoln's election in November 1860 to the office of president prompts the states of the Deep South to secede from the Union, beginning with South Carolina. The states of the Upper South, Virginia, Kentucky, Maryland, North Carolina, Missouri, remain in the Union. In fact, Virginia and North Carolina have rejected secession at convention. In February, Jefferson Davis is elected president of the Confederacy. Davis asks for peaceful separation in his inaugural address. As a necessity, not a choice, he says, we have resorted to the remedy of separation, and henceforth our energies must be directed to the conduct of our own affairs and the perpetuity of the Confederacy which we have formed. Davis continues, if a just perception of mutual interest shall permit us peaceably to pursue our separate political career, my most earnest desire will have been fulfilled. But if this be denied to us, and the integrity of our territory and jurisdiction be assailed, it will but remain for us with firm resolve to appeal to arms and invoke the blessings of Providence on a just cause. The ball is in Lincoln's court. He has a month to fashion his reply to Davis to be delivered at his inauguration on March 4th, 1861.
And that's where we are in today's reading. This address is, 37 paragraphs? It takes approximately 35 minutes to read. It's quite complicated, and I think that the understanding of union offered by paragraph 13 is one that is worth dwelling with. But prior to getting there, I want to point out something in paragraph 3. Lincoln says there that apprehension seems to exist among the people of the southern states, that by the accession of a Republican administration, their property and their peace and personal security are to be endangered. There has never been any reasonable cause for such apprehension. Indeed, the most ample evidence to the contrary has all the while existed and been open to their inspection. It is found in nearly all the published speeches of him who now addresses you. I do but quote from one of those speeches when I declare that, quote, I have no purpose directly or indirectly to interfere with the institution of slavery in the United States where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. I'm going to stop there. That quote is, of course, from the first Lincoln-Douglas debate in August of 1858. But I wanted to emphasize 2 points from paragraph 3, apprehension and then law. Apprehension is really interesting. If you think about what liberty is, especially if you've studied Montesquieu, you realize that feeling of not being safe or that you're in danger means a person is not experiencing liberty. Even the apprehension that somebody's going to rob you of your property, your peace, and your personal security is to be taken very seriously. Now, Lincoln says, of course, that this apprehension is unreasonable. And that's why he quotes himself and says, look, guys, I've been very clear this whole time. I have no purpose to interfere with the institution of slavery. Well, why? Why doesn't he have a purpose to do so? Because he believes he has no lawful right to do so. Lincoln, time and time again, has said, look, I'm going to obey the law. This is all about the law for Lincoln. So if he's going to follow the law, and the law of the land, of course, post Dred Scott, is that the United States government can't say anything about slavery. If he's going to follow the law, well, why not these seceding states? Why not these slave states follow the law? What moral ground are they on? So let me be clear on what I'm trying to say. The apprehension that's your property, your peace, and your personal security is in danger, has some moral ground in liberal thinking. But so too does law-abidingness have moral ground. Lincoln's tried to say your apprehension is misplaced. Well, what about their legal actions? Are they moral or immoral? Are they just or unjust?
So we proceed from a lower legal plane to something more substantive, to a moral one involving justice. And then as we get to some of the higher language in this about the fabric that binds America together, about memory and patriotism.
What are you thinking there?
I don't want to bring in something we're not discussing today, but we think of the Lyceum Address, where Lincoln speaks his reverence for the law and cold calculating reason as a foundation for the preservation of the American Republic. We realize that that might not be entirely what Lincoln thinks can serve as a buttress to the Union. Cold calculating reason is different from reverence. What a mother whispers to the lisping babe prattling in her lap is a bit afield from cold calculating reason, which says, this Union, because I've read the first 14 Federalist, I know is good for me. Therefore, I should not aver from it. Cold calculating reason may be sufficient for some, but may not be for everyone. And so in this speech, we see a progression. First, from that argument about apprehension, which Lincoln looks to quell. Then from a discussion of the Constitution dating back to its first president, George Washington. Even then, dating backward toward 1776 and 1774, the Articles of Confederation as earlier founding moments for the Union. And then in the high rhetorical plane of the peroration, Lincoln evokes the hearthstone of the Union, even reaching inside people's homes to found this Union.
So we saw in the single-digit papers, Publius advanced the argument that, look, everyone holds Union to be good. And so that sentiment from Publius is echoed here. You're speaking in particular of the historical argument in paragraph 15 of the first inaugural. Prior to getting to that, I want to point out something advanced by Lincoln in paragraph 13. As he continues from paragraph 3, he's showing everyone's going to uphold the law, no congressperson's going to go against it. And then he announces the severity of the challenge he faces. At the end of paragraph 12, he says, all of the presidents heretofore have conducted the office of the executive through many perils and generally with great success. Yet, with all this scope for precedent, I now enter upon the same task for the brief constitutional term of 4 years, under great and peculiar difficulty. A disruption of the federal union heretofore only menaced is now formidably attempted. Okay, so how is Lincoln going to navigate this great and peculiar difficulty? The next paragraph suggests how he wants us to understand his piloting of our ship of state. This is straight up political theory going on in paragraph 13. I hold that in contemplation of universal law, Lincoln says, and of the Constitution, the union of these states is perpetual. Perpetuity is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. All. Let's think about it this way. No government will allow for its own dissolution. This is as natural as survival. As much as self-preservation is a law of nature for all living creatures, self-preservation is the law of laws for every government. Regime type does not matter. Lincoln speaks of it as the fundamental law, as I would say, the law of laws. The law must be obeyed. The government must live in perpetuity. You can see this at the tail end of Plato's Crito, and you can see it right here in the beginning of Lincoln's first inaugural. He says, it is safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. Continue to execute all the express provisions of our national constitution, and the Union will endure forever, it being impossible to destroy it except by some action not provided for in the instrument itself. If we pull back from the great and peculiar difficulty Lincoln faces at this time, we might decide to put Lincoln in conversation with Jefferson. I'm thinking of Jefferson's letter to James Madison from September of 1789. Do you remember the line there? The earth belongs in usufruct to the living, that most remarkable thing, Jefferson says. Usufruct is the right of enjoying all the advantages derivable from the use of something that belongs to another, provided that the property is not destroyed or injured. Jefferson argues there that no society can, by natural right, bind the future with its perpetual law or constitution. That's Jefferson's principle. Jefferson even says there to Madison, quote, "The Constitution and the laws of their predecessors, extinguished then in their natural course with those who gave them being. This could preserve that being till it ceased to be itself and no longer. Every constitution then and every law naturally expires at the end of 19 years. If it be enforced longer, it's an act of force and not of right." Jefferson comes up with this 19 years because of actuarial tables, because of the mortality rate. But most importantly, Jefferson comes up with that because of the principle that the earth belongs to the living. Look at how anti-aristocratic this is. Look how anti-hereditary monarchy this is. Look how Lockean this is. The use of the thing makes it yours. I'm thinking chapter 5 of the second treatise, of course. This is the point. If you're dead, you can't use it. You can't pass it on so as to yoke the society to your will. So Jefferson says every 19 years, the people are to reconfirm, alter, or abolish the Constitution as they see fit. Well, what would Lincoln say? Governments proper are not subject to these actuarial tables. Perpetuity is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. Government is living. Government does not will its own death any more than a human being ought to. No provision in a government's, quote, organic law, Lincoln uses that language, organic law. No provision in a government's organic law that provides for its own termination is possible. So if government has organic law, that means there's something living going on that's according to nature as a matter of its life. It does not include a provision for its death. Dissolution of the Union, we must see, will destroy the Constitution. For the first purpose of the Constitution, as proclaimed in the preamble, is to form a more perfect union. So any notion that you can legally, by constitutional law, undermine the Union is ridiculous, because to do so would threaten the very existence of the Constitution itself.
The key phrase, I think, at the end being by the Constitution. But jumping ahead in paragraph 29, Lincoln says, "This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it." If we are reading just that sentence, we might think the Confederates, therefore, have a right to treat it however they will. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, if I'm Jefferson Davis, my ears are perking up, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it, or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it. That also is key. A revolutionary right exists outside the Constitution. It rests in Locke's language that the founders carried forward. It rests on an appeal to heaven. You cannot justify it on constitutional terms. And Confederates know this. When they do speak of seceding, they do not speak in language directly from the Constitution. They speak in language from the Declaration of Independence. Yet, to return to paragraph 13 and paragraph 14, they hold that the states can withdraw from the Constitution because it is a compact. Lincoln addresses this too. Again, if the United States be not a government proper, but an association of states in the nature of contract merely, can it as a contract be peaceably unmade by less than all the parties who made it? The answer is emphatically no. One party cannot withdraw from a contract. It takes all those who form the contract to do it. Time we got to paragraph 13, we're speaking in the language of political theory, that we're not resting this argument merely on law. And Lincoln, in the next couple paragraphs, takes it to its higher plane when we speak about the history of the Union. The history of the Union is older than the Constitution itself. So by the constitutional mechanism, by the ratification of the Constitution by the states in the 1780s, the logic for secession cannot rest on that.
So why does it take all of the parties who made the contract to dissolve the contract? Why can't I just take my ball and leave and dissolve the contract, Aaron?
Well, you're altering the nature of the union by yourself, right? We all entered into the union, and we didn't do it. Lincoln is very careful to say at the moment the Constitution is ratified. He dates it back to the Articles of Association in 1774. When one state leaves it, it changes the nature of the thing. It changes the nature of the compact.
I wonder if there's also something here to think about with just general law breaking. Breaking the contract is like breaking the law, if we just think about it in legal terms. Just because one has broken the law does not mean that all others are then freed from the constraints of the law. So South Carolina may break the law and leave the Union, but that no more undermines the Union as a contract, if that's all that the Union happens to be, than does a murderer undermine the positive law prohibiting murder, if that's all that the law against murder happens to be. The Union is still to be the Union in perpetuity. So this means then that just as much as the police and the judge and the jury must deal with a murderer, Lincoln must deal with South Carolina. If the move against the Union to try and undermine its very existence is illegal, then it's no more principled than breaking the law and trying to kill someone. And the reason I'm using that extreme example, you would say, well, why aren't you just talking about jaywalking? The reason I'm using that example of murder is because of the language Lincoln used in 13. All government means to exist forever. Leviathan is to be immortal, sort of stuff. Well, that's a pretty harsh argument. It's pretty serious, because what if the government is making bad laws? Lincoln's answer, as you've already pointed out, is in the Lyceum address, he says, deal with it. They'll sort themselves out. We don't like that answer, but that's the one he offers in the Lyceum address. And then we also know, amend it, as you've pointed out, he will say. So paragraph 14 and 15 are really interesting, and the institutional memory that you keep referencing in 15 is fantastic. The point is now is it's old. The Union is much older than the Constitution. So that shows something of even the sort of sacrilege of anyone who wants to undermine the Union. You're not merely talking about what we're doing now. You're going against stuff that was decided in 1774, that was matured and continued in the Declaration in 1776, further matured in 1778. It's not just about this Constitution. So there's something now that we can see that's distinctly anti-Jeffersonian. If I can go back to that letter to Madison, that's looking back to history to try and preserve that government under which we live. And that view is right at home with this view of union lasting in perpetuity.
And just one thing to add into the mix. If you are, maybe as a common lawbreaker, but certainly as a rebelling state, or as a state that is withdrawing from the Union, if you're doing that, you have to acknowledge that what you're doing is not within the ordinary constitutional means, that it is insurrectionary or revolutionary. And then the chief executive has to put it down.
Right. And that's the conclusion that he draws from all of this by paragraph 17. Secession is meaningless. There's no provision inside of our Constitution for you to do this. It's not provided for in the instrument itself. So you can't just say safe and touch some bass like we're children playing whatever game. Secession is null. It's void. It's meaningless. It doesn't exist. As he says, it follows from these views that no state upon its own mere motion can lawfully get out of the Union. That resolves and ordinances to that effect are legally void, and that acts of violence within any state or states against the authority of the United States are insurrectionary or revolutionary according to circumstances. If they're legally void, Lincoln can ignore them. They're meaningless. Paragraph 18. I therefore consider that in the view of the Constitution and the laws, the Union is unbroken, and to the extent of my ability, I shall take care, as the Constitution itself expressly enjoins upon me, that the laws of the Union be faithfully executed in all the states. What then about acts of violence? How is he to behave? They're insurrectionary or revolutionary. Well, so the Union is permanent. It's in perpetuity. And unless you're amending the Constitution, any attempt to leave the Union is null and void.
I just have one reservation, and I'm really not sure where Lincoln would take the argument. In paragraph 14, he says, one party to a contract may violate it, break it, so to speak, but does it not require all to lawfully rescind it? Now, maybe we can't look to the Constitution for an answer because the Union predates the Constitution, as he says. But here I think we would have to hang out in political theory and not legal theory, strictly speaking. But is there a mechanism by which the Union could be dissolved with the consent of every member?
Recall Locke, Second Treatise, Chapter 8. Just because a person doesn't get his or her way doesn't mean that they can then dissolve the Commonwealth. 50 plus 1 is needed for the ordinary day-to-day. And if you expected to have 100% agreement in lawmaking, then you would be like Cato going in the theater only to come out again.
But doesn't Locke also say that any member of the community can just walk out? And I guess this is where later Lincoln has to argue, physically speaking, we cannot separate. You can walk out of your Commonwealth in the state of nature and go off on your own. And return to the state of nature or to go join a new Commonwealth. But there is a physical reality here that Lincoln has to acknowledge, which is we're talking about states that are bordering each other. But does that change this conversation about the Union?
How so? What are you thinking?
Well, we're arguing that no government can have within itself the seed of its own destruction. Every government is intended for perpetuity. Therefore, by the Constitution, no state can leave, and that something greater, that is unanimous consent, is necessary to dissolve the Union, which preexists the Constitution. I guess my trouble is this: if this is a Lockean argument, why cannot the South simply walk away?
Well, I can at least answer it on Lincoln's terms. Why can't Lincoln let them walk away?
Yeah. Well, it is his responsibility to take care that the laws are upheld, and he has an obligation to the Constitution.
He has an obligation to the Constitution. He's sworn an oath. Lincoln is therefore charged with preserving, protecting, and defending the Constitution, which we have to see means preserving, protecting, and defending the Union. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect Union. So Lincoln has to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which means the Union. What exactly is his policy at this point? How should a statesman who is under great and peculiar difficulty behave? He says in paragraph 19, in doing this, there needs to be no bloodshed or violence, and there shall be none unless it be forced upon the national authority. If forced, Lincoln will use violence. For what? Paragraph 19. The power confided to me will be used to hold, occupy, and possess the property and places belonging to the government and to collect the duties and imposts. But beyond what may be necessary for these objects, there will be no invasion, no using of force against or among the people anywhere. So this is starting to inch towards answering, or at least thinking through the questions you posed, Aaron. Part of the reason why you can't just leave is because there is property and there are places that belong to the government in South Carolina. I'm thinking of a place in Charleston, for instance. And so you can't just take my ball and leave. Okay, so hold, occupy, and possess. He's not going to be aggressive. Lincoln might think that there's going to be an attempt in the future to force the remaining slave states to secede. Perhaps he thinks there's going to be somebody who's going to try to keep him from holding on to the forts. But in this case, the seceding states would be aggressive. They would be the violent ones. Well, what's his position then? Defense of the national government's property. And then he could justify retaking what's been lost previously. Lincoln is being very careful, not appearing to be a war hawk, an aggressor. And so something of keeping the Union together is exemplified in this behavior of not being a person who gives states reason to leave. He's being soft. He will be aggressive when forced, but that's it. The second argument against secession begins in paragraph 21. Lincoln says he's not going to address those people who seek to destroy the Union. He's only going to talk to those who really love the Union. He says, look, we need to figure out exactly why one would seek to destroy the national fabric. Do they really have legitimate complaints, or are they just imagining things? Remember, he did this starting back in paragraph 3. You have this apprehension, but you're wrong. I've been on record for years saying I'm not going to do anything except obey the law. And he's doing that again now here in paragraph 21. According to Lincoln, those who seek to destroy the national fabric are imagining their ills. Look at this language. Does this remind you of anybody? Look at paragraph 22. Before entering upon so grave a matter as the destruction of our national fabric with all its benefits, its memories, and its hopes, would it not be wise to ascertain precisely why we do it? Will you hazard so desperate a step while there is any possibility that any portion of the ills you fly from have no real existence? Will you, while the certain ills you fly to are greater than all the real ones you fly from, will you risk the commission of so fearful a mistake? Aaron, we were using this language when we were reading Federalist Paper number 7. Remember all of those arguments? You're worried about a strong executive. You're worried about a union. You should be worried about a strong executive whenever you don't have union. Remember those arguments? Paragraph 22 smacks of the arguments you and I were advancing back then.
Yeah, there you can hear Lincoln in his desperation asking, haven't we had this conversation already? Haven't we proved that safety is found in the Union, that destruction of our liberties is found outside of it? And he makes this argument when he thinks about internal dissensions within the Confederacy as well. In paragraph 25, he says the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy.
Yeah.
A majority held in restraint by constitutional checks and limitations, and always changing easily with deliberate changes of popular opinions and sentiments, is the only true sovereign of a free people. Whoever rejects it does, of necessity, fly to anarchy or to despotism. Here, says Lockean, unanimity is impossible. The rule of a minority as a permanent arrangement is wholly inadmissible, so that rejecting the majority principle, anarchy or despotism in some form is all that is left. And he imagines if you found a union, confederacy, based on the principle of secession, it will dissolve immediately because each member will, at the slightest offense, try to exit.
Yeah, and if the dispute is, as is the case here, according to Lincoln, about what's not expressly stated in the Constitution, then we should deal with it by majority rule. And if the majority lets the minority have its way, which would be, so far, the seceding states having their way, then that's not the will of the people. That's minority tyranny. And if the minority uses the threat of secession and gets its way, that's a slippery slope of never-ending threats of secession, wherein every minority threatens secession and the dissolution of the Union in order to get its way. That's why the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. I mean, could you imagine? Just think of it in terms of a relationship you're in. Somebody's always just threatening to leave, manipulating you in that way, no matter how in the wrong or right they are. That's despotism, to be sure, and here he identifies it as anarchy. Lincoln goes on to speak of the Supreme Court even in paragraph 26. Should the Supreme Court decide constitutional questions? Well, it did decide Dred Scott. The court is to decide specific cases brought before it by specific individuals, but these cases should not make for general rules that govern us, he says. For in this case, the people would cease to be their own rulers, quote, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. Please note, this is very interesting for us to consider. Please note, by 1857, Dred Scott v. Sanford was only the second time the court decided an act of Congress unconstitutional, and perhaps only the first time it did so in such a major dispute. The third argument against secession begins in paragraph 27. One section says slavery's right and ought to be extended, and the other section of our country believes it's wrong. That's the only dispute here, according to Lincoln. He begins with the obvious. And here's your physically speaking bit. Physically speaking, we can't separate. We're trapped. Geographically, we're bound together. We're divided on slavery, but bound together by geography. We can't but remain face to face. We can't be separate. We can't be distinct people occupying this place. We might even go to war, but after much loss, if there's no gain, slavery or no slavery, that same question is going to reappear. What is this, some kind of House Divided callback? Feels like it. I think that's the only overt statement on slavery in the first inaugural, right there in paragraph 27. Does that seem right to you?
There are the oblique references to property at the beginning. We're speaking about apprehension, but this is the only time it is mentioned.
Yeah.
Lincoln seems to think it doesn't matter to a significant degree that there is a moral difference on a fundamental issue like slavery. The Union still can coexist. Is that principle in contrast with the House Divided speech?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is right. But there's a difference between making it while running for the presidency and now that he's president. And he's reminding us of his oath, is he not? We know Lincoln time and time again throughout his presidency will say how much he hates slavery, how much he detests it. But he's also going to say, look, I'm not operating according to my own will here. Lincoln is trying to have us understand everything that he's thinking and will come to do in terms of legality, whereas today's presidents have mandates. The people's will. It's really an interesting distinction between the two. But look at paragraph 29, and this points back to some of the questions you raised earlier. Paragraph 29, now this is not a suicide compact.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way that we cannot be one people in this shared space. The states can't leave the Union because of the limits imposed upon them by space, and also because they don't have the right to do so. So you said, well, don't I have the right to leave? You said that earlier, Aaron. And then you said, where am I going to go? The people who inhabit this country retain the constitutional right of amending the Constitution whenever they grow weary of the existing government. And so I would like to point out to you that that's why it is we would consider the constitutional provision for the alteration of the Constitution as a lovely nod to Jefferson. You have the right to alter this thing as you see fit. So while the Constitution does not have provision within itself to destroy it, it has a provision within itself to amend it. And you got this ship of Theseus sort of stuff going on here now, where you might wonder how much you can alter the thing and it still be the same thing. But this is the answer. And this is an olive branch to the South. Amend it. Amend it. The Supreme Court should not be making decisions like it makes in Dred Scott. Lincoln has argued already. And he's saying, in terms of consent-based legitimacy, it shouldn't be making those decisions. That's not a statement on slavery at this point from his lips. But the people who want to leave the Union should want to stay in the Union because the Constitution provides the mechanisms whereby they can make the Union work for them. No matter how evil they are, I would add, personally.
Well, and then we get into a conversation about the particulars before the end of the speech, before we return to this high language, right? Amend the Constitution. Call a convention. I will review whatever amendments are sent to me. He makes himself amenable to the Constitution.
But he does admit, after holding out this olive branch in paragraph 29, you can either use your constitutional right of amending the Constitution or your revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it. So, of course, you still retain that right. I mean, there's a full confirmation of that right. This is a consent-based government. How else could he make that argument against the Supreme Court in the way that he made it if he weren't already thinking about the fact that this stuff should be a matter of legislation? But what are we going to do if people want to dismember or overthrow the Constitution? And we've just sworn an oath to preserve, protect, and defend that same Constitution. So he's saying here, you guys have the rights, but I've sworn an oath to protect this same thing. So you're going to force my hand to turn into a clenched fist.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing. The inhabitants of the country own this country, right? In the Lyceum Address, Lincoln says that they have an obligation to transmit it, but that obligation principally belongs to the president, right? The people's virtue, their patriotism, their good sense play a part in transmitting the government. But look what he says in the tail end of paragraph 30, the last sentence. The executive's, his duty is to administer the present government as it came to his hands and to transmit it unimpaired by him his successor. There is the idea of the president as the chief preserver of the country and of the Constitution.
He's done this stuff with institutional memory, or the memory of the people throughout the first inaugural. I'm the 16th president. There were all those other presidents. The Union has this history, all this language of perpetuity. You're right, Aaron.
And as the preserver-in-chief, an obligation to remind his countrymen and his dissatisfied countrymen what the Union actually means in this higher sense. And that's where he ends the speech.
But I want to point out one more thing regarding the Union here. You can either amend the Constitution or just use your right of revolution. He's given us those two options, that binary. But what is the South doing at this point? Is it attempting to amend the Constitution? No. Is it attempting to overthrow the government via its right to revolution? Not quite, no. The South is attempting to destroy the existing government by leaving the Union and constructing its own government. So to be clear, the 7 seceding states are acting according neither to their constitutional right nor their revolutionary right. So the Union is not a suicide pact, it seems, because you have these two ways out.
Yeah.
But the South is choosing this third way.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by they are not following their revolutionary right.
They're not actually overthrowing the United States Constitution and continuing the Union. Instead, what they are attempting to do is make their whole new thing.
Jefferson Davis asks for peaceful separation in his inaugural address. If a just perception of mutual interest shall permit us peaceably to pursue our separate political career, my most earnest desire will have been fulfilled. Secession is a half measure between revolution and amending the Constitution.
Yeah, which in the previous paragraphs was anarchic.
Yeah, it breaks the Union without acknowledging it breaks the Union, because I think the Confederates would say the Union is not actually dissolved, right? You still have your Union, it's just without us.
Yeah. You can still do all your New York stuff up in New York.
Yeah. The Charleston Mercury, on the day secession was announced, "The Union is dissolved," was their headline. Lincoln would say, "You misunderstand. The Union is not dissolved. You are not out of the Union. You are trying to leave the Union, but the Union remains in force. And not only does it remain in force, it remains in force with you in it. Simply, there are persons within the southern states who are rebelling. It's the president's job to convince them to come in and to continue to enforce the law. And then, should that fail, he might have to take recourse to additional methods."
These seceding states are going to force his hand. There's no way he can just abide by it. All of this stuff's a powder keg. It's going to blow. He's trying to keep more slave states from seceding. He doesn't want more slave states to have reason to distrust him and thinks he's going to aggravate them. But just as much as a broken law could be said to be no law, at that moment it's broken. Isn't that also some understanding of justice as reparative, as punishing, that seeks through harm in a paradoxical way to somehow mend? Show, actually, this is a law. It does have teeth. If you break it, we're going to compel you. So Lincoln's up against a wall, and I would like to suggest that he's thinking about all of that, given the thoughts we have on government back in those early double-digit paragraphs. Now, Lincoln, of course, would prefer an amendment process. He says this in paragraph 30 because amendments that originate in the people themselves are far preferable to every other course of action here, even to amendments that begin in Congress. And even if they began in Congress, the people would accept or reject them. So Lincoln goes on here to say, look, an amendment just passed through Congress the morning of this very inaugural address that, if passed, would guarantee that the federal government would stay out of the question of slavery in states where it then existed. What's crazy, Aaron, this would have been the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, as we have it, thank God, banned slavery. Of this amendment, Lincoln says the following, quote, "Holding such a provision to now be implied constitutional law, I have no objection to its being made express and irrevocable." The proposed amendment would make constitutionally explicit what Dred Scott already made the law. So this amendment seems redundant for Lincoln. He makes no objection. So what we're learning about union here from Lincoln is how much law is the shield that legitimizes the behavior of the executive. Because notice the Emancipation Proclamation only applies to the rebelling states. The executive Lincoln does not act against the court, but he acts according to the law of war, his oath and commander-in-chief, as we know from the letter to Conkling and the Emancipation Proclamation. But for now, in the first inaugural, President Lincoln would have no objection to such an amendment because, quote, it is his duty to administer the present government as it came into his hands and to transmit it unimpaired by him to his successor. So I'm offering a different reading of that, take it and transmit it. Mm-hmm. The last thing you want to do is be a president who sits over the end of government or hands a civil war to the next guy who comes in. All of this is really funny because now Lincoln's building the case to the people. I mean, I'm for union. I'm a union man. I don't think that's what they mean when they say that. But at any rate, Lincoln asks in paragraph 32 if there's a reason not to be confident of the justice of the people. And he says, each party in the present difference is confident that it's right. Hey, what do you know? It's politics. Well, the reason we might not be confident in the justice, the ultimate justice of the people, is that the people, all people, are recalcitrant and passionate. But all the same, if slavery is right, then the South, by God's will convince everyone of this. And if slavery is wrong, then God's will convince everyone of it. Please note it's the people who judge. It's the American people who's the ultimate judge. And it seems that their ultimate judgment should be just. We have to hope that they can look past themselves to judge well, though.
And at the end, thinking of Lincoln putting the ultimate judgment into the people, even though we began paragraph 29 with saying this country with its institutions belonging to the people who inhabit it, he ends by connecting that across history. We've spoken to the past before, but now we are going to invoke the whole of the American people. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. The passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave, and every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. What does memory do? It makes you look beyond the here and now into the past. It connects you with your home, with your ancestors, connects you with the blood of Lexington and Concord and the memories of the great statesmen. It shows you in some ways that your present reason is insufficient. You need to look back. And so while Lincoln says that he has to rest the decision on the people who can recall him from his office, or who can, he says earlier in the first inaugural, withhold from him the means to execute his oath, perhaps by electing a Congress that refuses to assist in his execution of the law in some way. He's appealing to the Federalists, right? To those who founded the Union. He's appealing to these arguments that are older than the generation he's speaking to about the safety and the choice-worthiness of the Union. I mean, that's where I think he's going with every patriot grave, right? Where it goes back to the founding generation, even beyond that.
Yeah, so look back, slow down, think calmly, think well. You're the judge, but I'm here to offer you some advice. I'm here to try and model this as well. So Aaron, on another level, that shows the gentle hand that he's extended throughout the first inaugural, models the sort of deliberateness and attempt at keeping bloodshed at bay that he needs to see in the people themselves. You know, even as his dissatisfied fellow countrymen in paragraph 36, they're the ones who have left the Union, and he still extends them a helping hand. He sees them as a part of the same family, or he sees their secession as illegal and void. But nonetheless, I mean, you know what family's like. So the government's not going to assail the South, even though they're the aggressors. God's not on their side. But all the American people, hopefully, the Constitution and certainly the Union are on Lincoln's side. And with this famous, beautiful, mystic chords of memory line in paragraph 37, we are all fellow countrymen, as you've said. We have bonds of affection. Lincoln himself doesn't want to mess up our bonds of affection. He wants to actually keep them together. It seems that when the better angels of our nature touch the mystic chords of our memory, the chords of the Union will swell. So think about this like Lincoln urges you to think about it. think calmly and well about the issue as framed by Lincoln, and upon doing so, delight in the song of our people. What is that song?
Union.
We're to think about the issue in the way that Lincoln frames it. And upon doing so, we may delight in the profession of the song of our people. Union. Lincoln gives this address upon being sworn into office, March 4th, 1861. Fort Sumter is attacked on April 12th, 1861. Civil War is unavoidable.
And the war came.
And the war came. So I think what's most important for us to understand about Union here is that Union is intertwined with the Constitution. You can't think of them apart from each other. It's one thing for Lincoln to speak of an apple of gold and a picture of silver. The apple of gold being the Declaration of Independence and the picture of silver being the Constitution and Union, which are meant to preserve and adorn the Declaration. But here, this thinking in 1861 is helping us understand the relationship between the Union and the Constitution. If the Constitution is going to survive, the Union must survive. And all governments proper intend to be immortal. None would have within them the means of their own demise. Our Constitution has the amendment process. Let's go amend this thing. And in fact, there's an amendment going through Congress right now, as if Dred Scott were not sufficient for you slavers. And if you don't like that, you got a right to revolution. I dare you to say now that you're thinking of George W. Bush saying, bring it on. That's not what Lincoln is doing at all. That's not it at all. He's trying to keep the Union together, and he's trying to get the slave states that are still in the Union to stay in the Union. And yet, these 7 states which have seceded have taken another illegal road. I think that's the argument here. And finally, what echoes against, for instance, Federalist Paper number 7 and the arguments we made there is that these secessionists are jumping from the frying pan into the fire. You're worried about it now. What are you flying into, he says. So I think that's what I would have to say on the whole of this. Wonderful inaugural address from our greatest president, or second greatest president, whichever way you want me to have it.
When we have our conversations about the farewell address, I'll ask you again. Hanging out with Lincoln, it's hard to imagine he is not the greatest president.
I was so fortunate last summer when I was in D.C. to walk to see Lincoln every day. So I was walking from the hotel where I stay, which shall remain nameless. And I was like, I got to go see Lincoln today. It was a luxury. It was very special.
What's the best time of day to go?
Anytime. I love going when there's no one there. I love going when it's packed because I love seeing all the different people who go there and just stand still and read and take it in. So I don't know. I like going in the morning. I don't know. Any time is a good time. For instance, but what I could say about the memorial at Arlington is that sunset is my favorite time to go there. The shadows being cast are most beautiful there.
What do those signs say at the Lincoln Memorial?
What do you mean, signs?
The signs directed toward the visitors about the proper attitude to maintain.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't seen them. What are they, Aaron? I just maintain the proper attitude in all things.
Oh,
so,
of course, yes.
It's
some sign about maintain. The point is so that people there maintain a proper reverence. It's about silence or solemnity. They're not always observed. That's why I like going early in the morning.
Yeah, I've always found it to be okay. Maybe I'm just lucky.
Yes, they say quiet, respect, please. Quiet,
Yeah.
line, respect, please. Those are quiet is meant for respect. Quiet is intended for it.
You have a dress code at your school, Aaron?
Shirt and tie.
And you all have a school tie? School colors?
No school tie. There is a real variety of shirts and ties and match and mismatching. Usually mismatching. One must wear a tie.
I can remember when I was in college still having some old school guys who asked everyone to take their hats off. And I think that's really interesting. And I think the same reason for something along the dress codes without being a fuddy-duddy about it. I think the goal of those things is to instill or make apparent a sense in the students that what we're doing here is serious work.
Yeah.
Maybe if you wanted to get pious about it, that's worthy of your reverence. That's obviously what you would hope to do. I mean, in the positive at the higher level. The lower level would be along the lines of no shirt, no shoes, no service. Or as is said in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, no shirt, no shoes, no dice. But I think in the higher sense.
The way that I've explained it to my students, and here thinking a little bit about Machiavelli's letter, I think, to Vittori, there is a certain dress, a certain attitude that accompanies a certain function. And we do not ask you to wear a shirt and tie when you are on the football field or the volleyball court. That would be ridiculous. But when you are facing the class, and we of course want our students to be learning 100% of the time, but you learn a different kind of lesson on the football field than in the classroom. When you are in the classroom, you have to be dressed for the certain activity there, and that involves something like symmetry, order, having to do something maybe even a little bit annoying, like tying a tie or finding your belt or pulling your belt out of yesterday's pants to put them in today's pants right before school as your mother is shouting that you need to go.
I think it's worth to pull it back to by no means is the first inaugural Lincoln's last word on Union. I don't know if you're surprised.
Let's see it.
But some of the most memorable last words of Lincoln are an attempt to bind the Union back together. No matter the peculiar and great difficulties he faces at his time, we ought to remember that this is constant work, that it is not a pattern laid up in heaven, that getting along with your loved ones and to varying extents your neighbors takes work. And that's the hard work that Lincoln faced and that we as citizens face to some degree or another. And so that's what's interesting about you talking about going to see Lincoln Memorial. Well, how are you going to behave there? What are you doing? You're taking a picture. I'm going to wait and let you take your picture. I'm excited that you're excited to be here and want to take a picture here. You know why? Because we have this shared love. We're the same in this way. I think reminding ourselves of that is very important. And I think it's one of the reasons why I like going to see Lincoln so much. It's one thing for me to go see him and contemplate him and dwell with him in that memorial. But I also see other people who, to whatever extent, share that love. I would like to offer that comment as a meditation on the importance of monuments, statues, memorials, pausing and taking them in and thinking about them again.
Well, let us strive on to finish the work we are in.
Very good. Where you get this stuff, you're so inspiring that you make this up on the spot and pull it and you're fully just come up with these things. A regular John Lennon.
I've got good speechwriters.
Aaron, it's been wonderful seeing you. I look forward to seeing you again. I hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.